Yeah, so the key elements. The first one was scoping, the one we have been discussing, where you think whether EIA is needed, you determine the impact uh, of the project and which activities are you going to do, the objectives, more especially when you determine the um, terms of reference. Then you have screening. Remember screening, we already discussed screening when we are looking at the EIA process. And another key element is identifying and evaluating project alternatives. So if you feel like the aim of EIA is not to stop the projects from being implemented, but as we said, the aim is to identify potential impacts. So if you feel like there are some impacts uh, associated with a project that are likely to happen, so you come up with alternatives. So you identify those alternatives and evaluate. For example, maybe some of the alternatives might be expensive than the other. So when you're trying to come up with alternatives, or you're trying to evaluate, you also look at the cost. If we use this method, or we use this way, what about the cost? So you realize some of the alternatives will have a better cost benefit analysis than the other methods that you can use. So you formulate those alternatives and see if you can find those alternatives and how you can deal with those alternatives. You evaluate actually. Evaluation will help you to choose the best alternative. So you identify and evaluate project alternatives. That's the third key element of EIA. So the fourth point is mitigation measures. Mitigation measures. Mitigation measures. So mitigation measures, when you find alternative, or when you have identified the impacts that the project is likely to have on the environment. So what do? You find appropriate mitigation measures, ways to deal with those impacts. How can you lessen maybe the impacts of those measures, or how can you reduce or minimize the impacts, or maybe eliminating the impacts of those projects here. So it helps you to choose the best solution. So mitigating, it means you are trying to deal with the impacts that you have identified. So what is the best way to deal with the impacts that you have identified? So you also come up with a monitoring plan. Because if you say maybe you find a solution, you have find a way of mitigating those impacts. Now you need to monitor, because sometimes you come up with mitigation measures to minimize the impacts of the project, but it can just be on paper if not monitored. So it can be written there, it will be minimized or be mitigated by using these strategies or these methods. But sometimes you may find they are not even mitigated. So you need to monitor to see if those measures, mitigation measures, are really being followed. So if you say, okay, there is too much dust, what do? Maybe we do it during the night when people are sleeping. Or maybe we need to splash some water on the road, like the way they are fixing Area 25. So maybe you can find alternatives to that. So you need to check. If you say they should not doing during the daytime, are they really doing what was planned? Yeah, because if you know, like, it will disturb other people, or it will disturb transportation, whatever. Sometimes you can decide, okay, what if we do this work during the night if it has some negative impacts? Identifying, like, monitoring and evaluation. Actually, there is evening. a module. I don't know. I think here we don't have, but it's a module on its own, monitoring and evaluation. And some people they'll even do a course on monitoring and evaluation. Yeah. So if you implement a project, monitoring it means you are checking the progress of the implementation. Because if you want to implement a project, you have a plan. You have a planned activities that you want to, or tasks that you want to perform on that activity to be successful. Yeah. Evaluation, you are monitoring, you are checking the progress, how it is going. Are things implemented the way they are supposed to be? Evaluation, usually, you may do mid-term evaluation of the project or end-term evaluation. You are checking the impact of the project. Did it, was it a success, like the project? Did it meet its goals, what it wanted to meet? That's why sometimes you find people doing survey just to check on the success of that project that they are trying to evaluate, so that maybe you want to do it in another place. So when you are evaluating, you check if there were some problems, some issues. So if you want to do it somewhere, it means you improve on such areas. Yeah. So the last one is EIA report and certification. EIA report and certification. So you write after all the procedures, you have collected the data, you have found mitigation measures, whatever, or you find methods of collecting data, which stakeholders you are going to involve during the EIA. You write an EIA report. You write an EIA report, and then approval or certification. So approval after everything that you have done, maybe decision. After the report is there, people read the report. It can be approved or not, because like they will check whatever you planned. Maybe there were mitigation measures. Did you really abide to the mitigation measures that were put in place? So if you did not abide by those, for example, it can be rejected. Your EIA can be rejected, or maybe uh, you may need to redo some things. So it may not be approved per se, but you may need to amend it so that it tallies with the EIA process. So if it is not approved, maybe you need to redesign your project. It doesn't mean you need to stop, as we said. The aim of EIA is not to stop the projects from happening or being implemented. So sometimes, because I'm just trying to lessen or to minimize the impacts, sometimes you can just be told to redesign your project. So when all the EIA is done, if it's approved, it means implementation will follow. You need to implement your project. So it means everything has been looked into, the impacts, how they will be mitigated. It means everything is there. So it's either it will be approved or disapproved. So if it is approved, it may be followed by certification. You may be given a certificate that EIA was done, then you can continue with your project. Yeah, so let's look at basic guidelines and procedures of environmental impact assessment. Today I didn't prepare a lot because I prepared for class discussions. So I wanted like us to have discussions, but now it's only one individual. So the steps in EIA, we have preliminary activity. We will look at each one of them separately later. So just listing them, the steps include preliminary activities, impact identification, baseline studies, impact evaluation, impact identification, there is impact evaluation. Then mitigation measures, preliminary activities, one, impact identification, which is impact identification or scoping. In bracket, you can put scoping. And then baseline studies. Baseline studies, impact evaluation, point number 4, impact evaluation or quantification. Impact evaluation, mitigation measures, assessment, comparison of, in bracket, comparison of alternatives. You conduct an assessment. Assessment or comparison of alternatives. Then documentation, decision making, and post audits. Yeah, so the first point is the preliminary activities. So under preliminary activities include identifying who will conduct the EIA. You need to identify the agency or the body which will conduct EIA, which stakeholders or relevant stakeholders are going to participate in the process. So you identify who will conduct EIA and the relevant stakeholders. And also you need to collect and review appropriate project information. You need to collect information through reviewing documents. Maybe you can just review documents to collect some information. You can review documents or collecting some information. So you can review appropriate documentation, laws, regulation, agreements, and standards that you need to follow. So those are the preliminary activities that you need to conduct. You need to know who will conduct EIA. You need to make a plan. Which stakeholders will take part in EIA process? So you include the relevant stakeholders. Maybe those people who will be affected by the project. The stakeholders can include the owners of the project and themselves, the EIA agency that will conduct EIA. As I said, like for us, we are just learning the basics of EIA. We cannot just at our level to go there and conduct EIA. We have eligible and reliable agencies which conduct EIA. So the second one is impact identification. Impact identification or scoping. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, they are the stakeholder, like the community where the project will be implemented. Yeah, they'll be the stakeholders in that project. Yeah. So the second one is impact identification or scoping. If you remember when we were looking at don't get confused with the key elements. As I said, if you look at those key elements, you realize that also most of the concepts are the same in the steps that we are looking at. Yeah. So what is scoping? This will be like a repetition. I think we are looking at it for the third time now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the impact identification, you are trying to list or identify all possible impacts of the project, not EIA. Because you want to implement a project, no, you are trying to check or determine what impacts can this project have maybe on the economy, social interactions, or on the environment. Yeah, so you list all possible impacts that you think. For example, if uh, you want to construct an airport, so within that area, you list all possible impacts that can result as a result of implementation of that project. What about the people within that area? Will they be affected? Like looking at the social aspects, the the economic aspect of it. If a project, I gave an example of if you want to construct an airport. So you look at the impact. If we construct the airport here, what impact will it have on the community? As I said, when we look at the EIA, it's not only negative, it can be even positive. So if you look at the economic aspect, how are the people going to benefit from the project? If there are negative impacts, you look at the the economic impact that this project will have on the people. What if it's taking the farming land of the people? Maybe their livelihood is dependent on that land. So it means you are taking away their land, maybe their fields. So it also affects them. And also you look at the environment. Maybe where you want to construct the airport, maybe there you have a lot of trees or maybe forests that you need to clear. What impact will clearing the forest have on the environment? If you want to do mining, what impact will mining have on the people? What if the mines are close to the residential areas where people are staying? What about the dust? Because it causes a lot of air pollution. So at this stage, you need to list all possible impacts. You need to list all possible impacts, and usually you can base it on it's based on the past experiences of similar projects. So sometimes through literature review, as I said, you need to collect data, whether through by maybe reviewing some documents. It means you can also review other EIA documents, maybe similar documents, to check the impacts. So through experience, so this project, like through literature review, you check maybe it caused this impact. So it is likely going to cause this impact on this project that we want to implement. So on impact identification or scoping is also where I said the scope of the area, the scope of the project, like the coverage of that project, the area, the magnitude. You also look, when scoping, you also look at the sensitive sites and significance. So it's the scope of the project. How much land, for example, will it cover? The magnitude of that project. So the scope of the project is pressed in the context of all possible outcomes of the project, all possible outcomes of the project. So the third point is baseline studies. Baseline studies. Baseline studies. So on baseline studies, you document all existing conditions before the project is implemented. Baseline studies. You want to come up with a baseline whereby you can check maybe the success of the project later on. So you need to know maybe what is the condition like right now before the implementation of the project, before the project comes in. So you conduct baseline studies, you collect information, you document all existing conditions before implementation of the project. So you need information about the physical conditions, for example, such as topography, soil, or climate before implementation of the project. You can also check the biological conditions of the project. It means you are trying to find baseline information that later you can check if things have changed or they have remained the same. So the conditions can be physical conditions. If you're looking at the soil, type of soil, maybe topography of that land, maybe noise levels, just to mention a few. So you need to check and document the physical conditions before the implementation of the project. You also check the biological conditions, such as the status of flora and fauna. Like flora, we are talking of plants, animals. Fauna, animals. While when you look at flora, it means plants. So you check biological conditions on the status of plants and animals in that area that you want to implement your project. You also look at sensitive areas such as breeding grounds or migratory paths. For example, breeding grounds, if maybe your project is to deal with, you will tamper with the lake or rivers where fish breeds. So you need to check uh, the status before implementation of the project, because some of these processes can be disrupted during the implementation of the project. So you need to know from the beginning. That's why in most cases, when even these projects which are implemented by different organizations, maybe they conduct baseline surveys. So baseline surveys will help them to find or to check, look at the information, to check the information, the condition of the area, of the people, before implementation of the project. So if you say, for example, you have reduced hunger or whatever by 50%. What do you mean if you said you have reduced by hunger by 50%? It means you knew the situation or the condition before implementation, and later maybe you find people are harvesting more than before. Then you can say we have reduced hunger, or maybe because the harvests have increased. So you need to know the background information. If you say we have improved the nutritional status of the children, what was the status of these children before the implementation of the project? So it's like you come up with the baseline where you can check the success of your project. So you need to look at the physical, biological, chemical state of that environment where you are going to implement your project. So you also look at socioeconomic status of the project locality, socioeconomic status, including population size, structure, distribution, income of the people, health status, infrastructure. So those are socio-economic aspects within the project locality that you need to check during the baseline studies. What about the population? Maybe during the implementation of the project, a lot of people maybe will be migrating to that area. Immigration. People will be moving from other areas to that areas. Maybe because they feel they will have increased job opportunities if there are opportunities for jobs. So population can increase. So you need to check the population size before implementation. Or if in some cases, maybe to make people move away from those areas, from the project site. So some people will be moving away, or maybe they'll be coming to the project area, depending on how they will benefit from that project. So point number 4 is impact evaluation. Impact evaluation. So it involves attempting to estimate the magnitude of the impacts on the base environmental conditions identified in the baseline studies. You are trying to check the magnitude, how much damage, for example, will it cause. So you check the magnitude, you estimate the magnitude of the impact on the environment. So if you have, during the baseline studies, you have identified some negative impacts. So now you need to estimate the magnitude, because some of the impacts will be very little impacts made on the environment. Something that you can do, even you can ignore them maybe, because the impact will be lesser than other kinds of projects. So you need to estimate those impacts you have found. What about the magnitude? How much damage? How much effect will it have on the people? So quantification should be attempted where possible. You need to quantify the impacts if it is in terms of costs arising from those changes. You so those impacts, you estimate the magnitude. You need to also to quantify where possible in terms of magnitude of change, in terms of the magnitude of change or costs that will arise from those changes. Because if you need to change something, definitely there are costs to be associated. Then point number 5, mitigation measures. Mitigation measures. So these are proposals for countering the adverse effects. Proposals for countering those adverse impacts. How are you going to deal with those adverse impacts that you have identified? You need to find solutions to those impacts. So you come with proposals, you propose ways on how you can deal with those impacts. For example, taking measures to reduce noise or soil erosion hazard, or cancelling or compensating people to be displaced by a project. So you find mitigation measures, or making provisions for migration of animals not to be impeded. So maybe you feel like certain animals will be affected. So some mitigation measures maybe what about moving them or migrating them to another place instead of just leaving them to starve. If to other people it may need counseling and compensating people to be displaced by the project. Some people may need to be counseled or compensated. You are moving people from point A to point B, and people are always used to their place. So when you are moving those people, when the project will displace people, some people may need counseling. That's why in most cases, in the lower shiri, kuweka kulima flood, akajo santajam kuti these are flood prone areas, they will move back to those areas. They are used. And then alazoloira. So it's like you are moving them away from a place they were used to a new place. It's the same when you transfer from this point to point, like to get used. But we are talking of displacing people, maybe people who will be permanently displaced. So they may need compensation. If the project maybe may end up using their land, maybe farming land or residential land, they may need to be compensated. So point number 5, you come up with measures to counteract those adverse impacts that you think. Maybe you feel like people will be displaced. What do you do to deal with such issues? Maybe you compensate them, provide land for them to settle, instead of just taking away their land and you leave it there. So point number 6, assessment or comparison of alternatives. Assessment or comparison of alternatives. So you may, by making counter proposals that may achieve the same objectives, but possibly at a lower cost to the environment. So you consider alternatives. So if moving people from point A to point B will cost much, what alternatives can you do? If moving animals from point A to point B will be costly. Maybe you just need to shift or to move the project to another place. So you check, you assess and compare all the alternatives and look at cost benefit, and you do cost benefit analysis. If we take this route to achieve objective A, because if you have different alternatives, it means you have an objective that you want to achieve, but you may have different alternatives. So different activities can be done to achieve